Welcome, everybody. I appreciate your being here. Alec, I see it's nice to see you again. We do have to catch up sometime. And welcome to new folks that we haven't seen before. And since we do have some new folks, I see we have a Scott Riefler. Huh, interesting name. So let me tell you a little bit about CFCR. It's a objective nonprofit seeking to work on behalf of the consumer. And how does that happen? Well, number one, it's understanding that legalization is usually half the battle. Most legalization, most legislation doesn't have implementing regulation. And what does that mean? A perfect example is the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill of 2018 produced hemp and as a unscheduled product, and all of the cannabinoids from hemp were unscheduled. Terrific, fantastic. Guess what? They're not legal to put in products, so it didn't matter. That's an example of why legalization is not the end of the game, and that regulation is what is going to bring safe products into the market, and that's what CFCR is about, and bring the right folks into the market and attract folks like Dr. Tischler, who you will learn about. So we will get to Dr. Tischler in a moment, but first, let me tell you about my co-host, Erica Alonso. Erica, well, I don't have, there's no too high praise for Erica. Number one, she writes the script.
It's not control.
And she is my partner in kicks and giggles and in serious stuff, and hopefully someday some serious money making activity. But right now, we're an educational organization. And to give you a little bit about what Erica brings to this organization, her work has included developing, positioning, and branding a product with Perrigo. Perrigo is a multinational pharmaceutical, wellness, and generic pharmaceutical company. Terrific company. In fact, they have joined us as a member, which we are thrilled about. And she's also and has been the co-founder and chief storyteller of Stairwell D, which is an agency specializing in digital business to business work. And under Erica's incredible charm and leadership, some of the clients that Erica has worked with, names you'll know: Discovery Communication, Estee Lauder, NBC Universal, and Admel, which was acquired by Google. In addition, Erica has led branding and Marcom strategies for such seminal countries. Yes, they're almost like countries. Their net worth is bigger than some countries. Brands like AOL, Time Warner, Luminate Worldwide, which is now Razorfish, and of course that small little company with $1 trillion in cash, Apple. So we are blessed to have Erica as our strategic communications and marketing executive, an entrepreneur with decades of cross-platform experience and transformative business to business and business to customer solutions for large market leaders as well as small businesses. Little known fact, Eric and I met in the bathroom of an ArcView event eons ago. It was at least 3 years ago, which is an eon in the cannabis business and in the cannabis industry. And I am so happy it morphed into a real, authentic friendship. And that's another thing about CFCR. We embrace our members and we want to make people feel valuable. And so I start every, if you will, Cannabis Cafe with this affirmation: I am unique, I am valuable, I am loved. And I ask you all, if you will, on the count of three to say it with me because it feels good. One, two, three. I
I
am
am unique.
unique.
I
I am
am
valuable.
valuable.
And I am loved.
Loved.
I am loved.
And you all are. And thank you for being here today. I hope you'll learn a little, feel good, and share some with us too. So with that, Erica, I think I'm going to move over to you and ask you to get started with setting the table and getting us ready for Dr. Tischler, whose experience and learning about him has been transformative for me.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sherry. And thank you for those words. I did not write all of those words. This is our 17th Cannabis Cafe. We like to say it's no canned lines. It's just conversation. It's not about being a dog and pony show. It's more about members getting to learn about each other's various functional roles in cannabis, the how, the what, the why they do it, and then how their thoughts may influence something that we're tackling or simply expand your view. And then in terms of housekeeping, Cannabis Cafe is not your typical webinar with only the hosts on the mic. So a reminder to all of you now, you're not muted unless you've opted to. So please keep that in mind. And let's give it over to Sherry to intro Jordan.
So Dr. Tischler is a cannabinoid specialist, which is a term that he coined many years ago, as he sought to increase standard of care for patients and the level of education for his colleagues based on data, science, and best practices. He is the founder and president of the Association of Cannabinoid Specialists, which aims to educate clinicians, lawmakers, and the industry about best practices and needed tools for proper patient care. And boy, is he smart. He graduated from Harvard College and then Harvard Medical School, and then trained in internal medicine at Brigham and Women's Hospital, and is faculty at both Mass General Brigham and Harvard Medical School. He has spent many years as an emergency physician providing care to the underserved in East Boston and at the VA. Dr. Tischler is a national and international keynote speaker and an author on a variety of topics related to medical applications of cannabis, including dosing, pain management, and opioid sparing, behavioral health, approaches to treatment for human sexual dysfunction using cannabinoids. Dr. Tischler is a strong proponent of the industry and the patient's best interest. Currently, the patient is at the mercy of an unregulated industry. He and the ACS strive to improve education and knowledge and lend his credentials to the CFCR goal to help educate and expedite regulation so we can have federally legal products and people will know what they're getting and get what they think they're getting and actually be able to go in and ask for what they want and get what they want. Finally, Dr. Tischler's awards are numerous. His accolades likely are numerous, and I'm only going to name a few, but he was the recipient of the Clinician of the Year and was awarded lifetime membership on the Hadassah's Physicians Council for his work in cannabinoid medicine. So the list goes on, but I'm going to turn you over to the man of the hour, Dr. Jordan Tischler.
But wait, we did.
Oh, yes.
Fun fact.
A fun fact.
You guys are throwing my head.
It wouldn't be Canna Cafe without the fun fact. And given what Sherry provided, Dr. Tischler is a rock star. In fact, in fun fact, he truly is, because he spent years in the music industry producing records, mixing for Britney Spears, and on and on. I just was floored by this. So, like, what was your walk-on song? You know, and then you can start your presentation. But I was just fascinated by that part of the story.
Thank you. Yeah, I've had kind of an odd career, I guess. It's kept me amused and entertained. You know, one of the things I learned early on in my medical career was there's a big difference between being good at something and enjoying it. And so for the first 20 years of my career focused on emergency medicine, I was good at it, and but I didn't really enjoy what I was doing. And after about 20 years, I figure I had sort of done and seen pretty much everything, and furthermore gone on to teach all of my colleagues everything. And I started to feel like, okay, fine, at this point, like, a monkey could do my job. And so I need to find some new vistas. And timing was very coincident with this development of the cannabis industry, and that sort of got me into this thing. And let me just also back up and say that those of us who have gone through the Harvard system 3 times or so, we call ourselves preparation age, just to not take ourselves too seriously.
Great.
That is the background. I want to pull up some slides and just kind of wander through them. I will admit that having written these slides, I haven't looked at them recently, so we may be up for some surprises along the way, but hopefully y'all can bear with me. And this is just my little spiel on the Association of Cannabinoid Specialists. Let's see if this goes. So, you know, where this all ended up starting was with my recognition in the emergency department that I was taking care of a huge number of patients whose lives were really destroyed by various substances. But if you actually looked at what substances we were talking about, really on that top 10 list, 1 through 9 was alcohol. And you know, it's very fashionable at the moment to talk all about opioids and stuff, but really when we were actually looking at what came through the door, it was alcohol, and then maybe an occasional opioid or benzo issue. But what was interesting is that, you know, in sort of 2012, when Massachusetts started talking about medical cannabis, I went, yeah, that's interesting. You know, you'd think if this stuff were really toxic, I'd be seeing somebody sick with this here in the emergency department. Now, in fairness, 10 years later or whatever it is, we are seeing more of this in the emergency room, unfortunately. But at the time, it was really zero. And some of that was about prevalence and potency and stuff like that. But ultimately, my thinking was, look, the relative toxicity here is much lower. And so if there might be some truth to this concept of medical, I should look into it, you know? And it took me several years actually to wade through the then 25,000 studies that were available. But I came away from that deep dive really convinced that cannabis and its derivatives can be used successfully as a medicine, but that they need to be viewed as a medicine, and there needs to be thought given to how we're using it, how we're delivering it, how pure is it, and the dose and the timing and all of that sort of thing that we think about in medicine, but we don't necessarily think about particularly on the recreational side of things. And wow, you can see that this slide has an old typo in it. Once I started feeling like there was real, you know, legs on this, I felt like I was sort of honor bound to do something about it. And as you can imagine, the VA, my then employer, they were not having any of it. We had just recovered from years of a gag order. So the idea of going further into actually treating and educating patients was a non-starter. And even the academic institution, the Brigham Women's Hospital, now part of Mass General Brigham, is, you know, said, look, we can't do this because the federal law will, you know, allow them to take all our money away, and then we'd be not able to take care of patients. So that led me to my private practice, Inhale MD. I often say it was never on my bucket list to run a private practice. I think I'm a very lousy business person, though I certainly learned along the way. And then I ended up founding the Association of Cannabinoid Specialists, hence the typo, because Sue Sisley, who many of you may know is a cannabinoid researcher, was teasing me. She said, "Oh, Jordan, you're the only doctor out there who cares about their patients. Everyone else is just giving cards." And I think she actually meant, and I should just give out cards too, but it really rubbed me the wrong way. I'm kind of a Boy Scout in that regard. I believe very firmly in the importance of patient care and the idea of handing out a medicine without appropriately discussing, informing, and coming to a plan with the patient just seemed wrong and malpractice. And I still think it's both of those things. So we started the association with the idea that we would rally other clinicians of good faith to this concept of actually taking care of our patients. And it's morphed into a large educational effort aimed at clinicians who want to practice cannabinoid medicine, as well as clinicians who don't practice cannabinoid medicine, but need to know, because they're on the front line, sort of what do we need to know about this stuff for our patients, and when to refer to some sort of specialist. And then, of course, what we're largely here to talk about today is sort of the legal and regulatory environment. And we certainly believe that cannabis should be more legal than it is. We'd like to see, a nuanced approach that focuses a little bit less on the desires of industry and a little bit more on the needs of patients. And so we proposed a few ideas along that lines. And I'm not going to read you the mission statement. You've either had a chance to read it or you've heard me say basically what's in there. Core values, we think patients are a vulnerable group and that they deserve the highest standard of care and products. We believe very strongly that recreational use is just not the same as medical use. They have different goals and different needs, and really they need to be addressed separately with a footnote, which is that there's always going to be enough overlap that there needs to be some thought in the regulation to both directions or both lanes, at the same time. And an example of that is, we would like to see dispensaries stop giving uninformed medical advice to medical patients. But if we achieve that, we also need to make sure that it doesn't then just pop up on the recreational side, and that, people are getting their advice from somebody who's knowledgeable. We believe that prohibition is a major public health issue and has failed to produce any positive outcomes. Cannabis is a medicine and it should be regulated by medicines. We believe that physicians and other prescribing clinicians should be not only able but required to write a prescription. That requires then that they step up and take ownership for their advice, as well as being informed enough to give advice. And then consequently, we believe that the sellers of cannabis products should honor those prescriptions just like they would if they were a pharmacy, and that there should be a moratorium on making unsubstantiated medical claims. And of course, we need to improve the safety standards of all of these products. I think I've sort of hit on that point. This is just a picture just saying, why do we do this? Well, those folks are the reason that we do this. We've got over 300 members now, largely across the world. We have members in Canada, Britain, Spain, Panama, Colombia. Not on the list is Australia and Germany, and Hungary, Israel, and it goes on from there. We've got a whole bunch of continuing medical education activities available, including a comprehensive sort of soup to nuts type video program that's really intended to take people from what is this to, okay, now I know how to sit down and talk to my patients about this. And then we have a whole bunch of a la carte modules that are sort of deeper dives on particular subjects like female sexuality is one, GI disorders is another, drug interactions is a third, and there's things like that. We also provide a series of handbooks, which are sort of quick and dirty references. Okay, the patient has such and such. What do I do now? And then on the policy and advocacy side, we've certainly been involved in making recommendations to the FDA, DEA, National Health, as well as a range of the states, of which that's just a small fraction. We kind of mentioned most of these things already, memberships, the benefits. But I think that, from my own point of view, The educational resources are phenomenal and can't be beat. They're always, always, always focused not just on data, but on high quality data that's derived from humans, unless there isn't, in which case it makes a very great point of pointing that out. As a matter of fact, I did a course on minor cannabinoids and one on terpenes, and basically we went through all of the literature, none of which is in human beings. And so, the punchline to both of these courses is very interesting, not ready for prime time in human beings yet. The clinical reference library is a vast resource of highly curated scientific publications. Really, the goal was to put forward the 2 to 3 seminal studies in each area. So there's a section on neurology and then a subsection on, say, ALS, and there are 2 or 3 papers there, and then 2 or 3 papers on multiple sclerosis, and then, on so on. And there's a whole section on risks and delivery methods and all of those sorts of things. Members get a subscription to cannabis and cannabinoid research, as well as a large discount on open access fees and that sort of thing. And I think the most important part is that every month we have mentoring sessions where we all get together and talk about clinical cases or political issues or whatever it is, where people can meet each other and exchange ideas and learn something from each other. So that to me is the most important part. Ways people can get involved. Obviously, you can join us. We don't ask that you're a clinician. We will take anybody who wants to become involved. And furthermore, we love volunteers. It's largely a volunteer-driven organization. So anybody who wants to can stick their hand up, and we would be very happy to have the help. Spreading the word is very important. And clearly, we have also some folks here from various aspects of the industry, and we do work hand in hand with industry to achieve our goals. So corporate sponsorship or donation is a hugely important part of what we're doing. This is, I think, my last slide. It really just kind of goes over what we've already talked about, but I do want to point out that if anybody's at all interested, cannaspecialist.org is the website where you can learn more about what we're doing, poke around and avail yourselves of the resources, and then either join or reach out or whatever it is that would be helpful to you. Yep, that's it. So I will put those away and we can move on to the next section of the chat.
So Jordan, you're a 501c3, is that right?
Actually, we're a C4.
C4,
but
okay. Well, thank you. Very educational. We're all about that here, and certainly with FCR. But let's go into something a little more interesting. You and I talked yesterday, and it was like your origin story. What made you go from Harvard to cannabis with a midway stop at the VA? Love to hear what was driving you and what helped inform your path.
Well, excuse me. It really was kind of as I've mentioned that I had that aha moment. I actually kind of remember standing in the middle of the ER. There's sort of these big open rooms with the bays off them, and I can remember standing there, and I think it was just that confluence of events where there had been something probably in the Boston Globe that morning about the upcoming ballot referendum and about legalizing medical, and then I'm standing there. Probably I was taking care of the umpteenth gentleman who was in the ER for excessive alcohol use, probably for the multiple time that week. Which gets, it's very hard for them, there's no question, but it's also really frustrating on a care provider who's, really been trying to help, but it just, is a revolving door. And it made me really stop and think, we've got to do better than this. And if cannabis is helpful for pain management, anxiety, insomnia, etc., and furthermore, maybe even could supplant, the reasons that people are drinking excessively, right? I mean, I still get asked periodically if cannabis can be used essentially to treat alcoholism. And sadly, the answer to that is probably, but we don't have any data on it. But we have a lot of data on, again, the pain management side of things, the PTSD and anxiety, depression side of things. And those things are often the drivers of people's alcohol consumption. So if we can get in there and intervene on those sort of primary processes, then for many cases, the alcohol becomes more manageable or even potentially something that can be put aside. Um, I have many, many patients who came to me saying, Doc, I'm here because I have terrible back pain. And for years now, I've been treating that by drinking, whiskey excessively. And I'm now starting to feel like the alcohol is really harming me. Can you help me? And really what I will say to them is, look, let's get your back pain under control, right? And then 12 months later, they've been coming back and we've been making progress. And they'll say, not only is my back pain better, but I'm not drinking anymore, and I'm losing weight because I'm not drinking all those calories. And generally, there's just a sort of multifactorial improvement in their well-being and their sense of their well-being. And I think that's the name of the game, and that's why I'm in it.
Awesome. Well, now that you're here, I'd love to ask a seemingly simple but complex question, and that is, what state do you think is closest to getting it right for medical use, and why?
That's a great question, and sadly, the answer is there isn't one. But what I really think is that I don't even want to say many, but some of the states have gotten bits and pieces of it right. And so when I was thinking about just that question in formulating some of the overarching policy goals for ACS, I sort of came to the conclusion that what we really need at the federal level is something that you might call the greatest hits of, right? And we've certainly talked about states' rights and using the states as the incubator of innovation. And I think that at least in the cannabis side of things, is worked out actually sort of as we might hope, in that, again, certain things from certain states are worth retaining and promoting, while other parts less so.
Are there any specific ones that you think? I mean, because I had been in Connecticut, now I'm in Florida, and it's completely different.
Yeah, well, so Florida is an interesting example, and they're one that I would point to. Florida itself at the moment, politically is having some difficulties, and not least of which are focused on the cannabis side of things. Right now, the Attorney General is trying to block the ballot referendum for recreational legalization. But one of the things they did right when they implemented medical is they required that the clinician write a prescription. They don't call it a prescription, they call it an order, because then somebody decided that the word prescription is somehow not protected by the First Amendment. But the bottom line is, you have to get in the computer as the clinician and say, so-and-so needs this much of this kind of cannabis, and it has to be renewed every 45 days or something, which is a little bit nuts, but just that idea that the clinician has to get in there and make some sort of an on-the-record statement besides yes or no, I think is a huge step forward. And I think that concept needs to get propagated, and I think it needs to get improved so that there are that there's more specificity. Another state that I think did something well is Massachusetts, which is my home state. Massachusetts has done a whole lot of really stupid things, but one of the things they did right is that they have sort of gotten away from the list of conditions, right? Because if you think about it, almost every state has this list of approved conditions, but why are things on that list? Certainly the legislators themselves are in no position to decide what should or shouldn't be on those lists. And oftentimes the things that are on those lists are put there through a very sort of odd political process whereby, you know, somebody, uh, some group finds some patients, and then they make a very heartfelt plea and all of that sort of stuff. But there's rarely any questions directed at clinicians about this. There's rarely any real review of the literature. So I think that the whole concept of a list of conditions is just really a poor design, and that what we should be doing is having clinicians use their training and judgment on what should be treated without those restrictions. But as I've also mentioned, I think those clinicians need to be held to a higher standard than they are right now, so that they're really more accountable for their decision making. So in Massachusetts, we have 8 conditions, but the law then reads, after the list of 8 conditions, it says, in any or all other severe and debilitating conditions as determined by the clinician, or it actually says physician. And I think that that's great, because essentially what that does is it demotes those 8 conditions to examples of what they mean, but without tying my hands, so that I can write a cannabis prescription for pain or anxiety, even though neither of those are on that list of 8, but where there's really good data for treating patients that way.
Do you actually write a prescription? When you say you write a prescription, I'm obviously curious, because well, I'm going to let you talk to it instead of me.
Here's the not so short answer. I think number one, that we obviously should be writing prescriptions. And I think that those prescriptions should function like a prescription in the pharmacy world, which is to say that it communicates to the pharmacy what is to be sold and how much and all that sort of thing, and it's legally binding. And we don't have any of this in the cannabis field, and I think that that's hugely problematic for my patients. So what I end up, doing from a legal point of view is I provide them a recommendation, aka a card. But every patient, we spend an hour going through what's going on with you, and what do we need to know about cannabis and this kind of product and that kind of product, and it all funnels down to a treatment plan, which then I have a document that, legally speaking, in the pharmacy world would qualify as a prescription, that I fill out with their name and date of birth and my DEA number and my signature, and then it says, get this kind of cannabis in this amount and use it this way. And I send that to my patients. And I what I do actually is, I'm talking to the patients, I say, this is my attempt at a prescription, complete with the stupid air quotes, because what I say is, look, this doesn't go to the dispensary. It doesn't make them do what I say, and they wouldn't know what to do with it. But it's really a communication tool between me and the patient at this point. Back before COVID, when things were in person all the time, I had these things actually on paper, and I would send people home with it filled out, and they would take it to the dispensary. And a few of the dispensaries kind of got hip to it, which was good, but most of them didn't know what to make of it. And the best was that there was a patient who came back to me, having gone to the dispensary and shown this prescription thing. The bud tender said, "Oh, I don't know what your doctor's talking about. Don't listen to him. I'll tell you what to do." And that's exactly what we don't want, right? And by the way, that bud tender then told my patient, whose prescription was to take 2 puffs on 15 to 20% THC cannabis, so an equivalent of 5 to 10 milligrams of cannabis once a day, they suggested adding, keef into the bowl, so taking their 15% up to 50, 65%. And the patient called me at 3 in the morning and said, "Doc, why do I feel terrible?" Well, I said, "What did you do?" and then this whole story came out, and I'm like, well, we know why you feel terrible. It's very unfortunate that they led you to that place. And again, that's sort of the nidus for these recommendations for policy that I have.
So how did you get educated? How do you know what to prescribe? Is there education for doctors? And how many doctors participate in it?
Well,
Pick a question.
yeah, no, it's exactly the right question. And I think that, again, part of my impetus for forming the Association of Cannabinoid Specialists was so that other clinicians, perhaps those who are slightly less maniacal or motivated than I am, don't have to do what I did, right? So if somebody comes along now and they're interested in learning about this, they can sit down with our comprehensive course and learn from, knowing nothing to being competent in the clinic. And I think that's hugely important. How did I do it? I went to PubMed. And if you, at that time, is 10 or 11 years ago, you put the word cannabis into the search bar, you got 25,000, that's 25,000 studies. I'm also generally fond of pointing out that at the same time period, if you put the word alcohol into the search bar, you only got 5,000 studies. Cannabis is without question the most researched substance on earth. It is just that, we haven't had a framework for making use of much of that research. And as you can imagine, the other thing that's a problem with that is that a lot of that research is either very low quality, meaning it's just not well designed, or it's really deliberately and a bias towards finding harms. In Don Tashkin's pulmonary study, which started in 1981, is a perfect example, right? This was NIDA giving Dr. Tashkin money to figure out how bad it was to smoke weed. Except the problem was his results were that it isn't that bad to smoke weed. I generally don't recommend smoking because there are other issues, but the point is that compared to tobacco, it turns out that they went after the wrong. They gave him money for the wrong reasons, and thankfully we got good data out of it. Going through 25,000 studies, and trying to figure out what this means and making heads and tails of it was insane. And now we have closer to 35,000 studies in PubMed. So I think that trying to expand the knowledge of clinicians who are insanely pressed for time, right? By saying go to PubMed and figure it out, that's not going to happen. And similarly, there are also a lot of organizations out there that want to educate clinicians, but they don't come from a medical background, so a lot of what gets published is not particularly helpful and would be rightfully looked askance at by clinicians. So that really coming into this to provide very clearly evidence-backed coursework with focus on human beings from a source that is that doesn't have any skin in the game, at least financially, I think makes this a much better model for educating clinicians.
Well, this is, I mean, it's fascinating to me because, your story to Sherry's question about, the patient that calls you wondering why he's not feeling right. It's something that we've all accepted as a norm in cannabis really isn't. If I think about it, like elsewhere in your life, I see a doctor for whatever is ailing me, for symptoms that need a diagnosis, a prognosis, a prescribed treatment, a therapy, a drug, whatever it be. And those specialists are about my unique physiological care, right? Not a specialist for a single drug. So then you describe what's going on at the dispensary, even the medical dispensary. Why do you think the cannabis industry isn't seeking that same, parallel? Like, MSOs could have like pharma reps that go and educate local physicians about their cannabis products.
Yeah, I think that is a complicated scenario. Really, a number of MSOs have come to me over the years and said, hey, doc, we'd like to do some research and sort of legitimize our products. And generally speaking, I say to them, that's great, I'd love to help you. But then you get into this situation where they suddenly realize that doing research in any reasonable fashion is going to cost millions of dollars, and that they don't have to do it to get their products on the market. So why would they spend millions of dollars to do homework that they don't need, right? And if you think then about the pharmaceutical industry, they can't go to market until they've done the research to appease the FDA. And so I think that, I'm not going to say that the FDA is pristine or above reproach, but on the theoretical level, they're the reason that this science gets done, right? Because you can't go to market unless you've gotten approval. And we don't have anything like that in the cannabis industry. And as a consequence, they're not willing to make that kind of investment.
Yeah, no, and the way that you even described it before, if you prescribe something, you're trying to establish like what's the maximum level for an effective use. A dispensary is all about upselling.
Yeah, I think you meant to use the word minimum, which is what I
minimum. Sorry.
I mean, I think that is a fundamental stumbling block, right? I mean, the cannabis industry, rightly so, from a capitalist point of view, want to sell as much product as they can, and we can understand that from a capitalist point of view. But when we think about medicine, the goals of medicine with a capital M, plus also just meaning the ways in which we approach using medicines with a little m, it's always how little do we need to use in order to get the desired effect. And really, if you exceed that amount, then what you're really doing is getting side effects and potential risks. So we're always kind of trying to be minimalist, and the industry would rather be maximalist, and that's a conflict that's very real. And I think that underlies a lot of the poorly written medical laws that we have across the country. And also, I think that there is a very strong initiative in the industry at the moment to sort of try to subvert people out of the medical market and into the recreational market, or simply to get people into the medical market just so that they can buy larger quantities of cannabis. But there's really no cooperative concept of working with clinicians for the better care of the patient. And now I think that this is, from a business case point of view, actually a big mistake, because as I often point out, in the US, our estimates are between 20 and 30 million cannabis users. And that seems like a big market. And I think any CEO would go, yeah, I want a slice of that. But at the same time, I would say, look, if you look at the population in the United States who are over 55 years old, myself included, every single one of those people will, not may, or, but will at some point develop one or more conditions that are amenable to cannabis treatment. That's 180 million people. As a CEO, I think I'd like a slice of that number, not 20, So I think that I am hopeful that as we continue to mature both the regulations and also the sort of financial or economic system around cannabis, that more and more companies will start to take a longer view and start to really think about how do we button this down. And that may ultimately lead to their becoming pharmaceutical companies, actually, more so than just cannabis companies. I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily either.
Well, let me ask you, are you of the mind that cannabis is either going to be pharmaceutical or recreational?
Well, let me put it this way. I think that it would be great if we could go forward with sort of a three-lane model. So a recreational, medical, and a pharmaceutical model. I don't know that I think it's going to happen that way. That is to say, I think pharma companies are likely to get in and do the pharma thing, But in terms of the recreational and medical lanes, I just feel that there is going to be this shift more and more towards trying to shove everybody into this recreational lane. And if we get to the point, or rather when we get to the point where there are viable pharmaceuticals, then I don't think we necessarily need that middle medical lane. But I get very concerned that because of the nature of science and drug development, it could be 10 to 15 years before we have a decent array of actually approved and researched pharmaceuticals. And so where I get worried is, what happens if that medical lane disappears too soon? And so, in situations where I've been asked about, recommendations for how this future should look, I think that if we do decide that we want only two lanes, pharmaceutical and recreational, that middle lane needs to get preserved and possibly even expanded, at least for some period of time. And maybe this is a sunset clause or something like that, but there has to be some period where we allow things to overlap so that those pharmaceuticals can meet the standard. And actually, the proposal that I've made in the past is simply saying, all right, it's a 10-year period or something like that, at the end of which manufacturers will then be expected to either go into the recreational production or have, over that period of time, 10 years, stepped up their game to the point where they're now really functionally a pharmaceutical company, and their products can go through that approval process.
Well, this is a topic that keeps me up at night. And one of the reasons why I founded CFCR and tried to bring together, oh dear, and you still on my computer, there we go. And that is, pharmaceuticals are incredible. Recreational, a lot of folks in the industry believe the recreational market will address the medical market. And that market that you speak to in between, which is a market you think that needs to exist until pharmaceuticals under the FDA requirements are developed. So how do you see that market being different, if you do? It being that middle market, which will provide product that addresses quality of life, among other things. And by that I mean anxiety or sleep or some of those other things that we all know people use it for cannabis for.
I think that I get asked sometimes, well, are there different products in the medical market than in the recreational market? And at least at this time, the answer is really no. I think over time, we may start to see more specialized products come along that may not yet reach that FDA standard, but may have enough beginning data that we can use them. And so I really do see the medical market as being kind of that bridge. And there are things that we've already talked about, do in the medical market, hopefully at a national level, that make it a better bridge. And so, for example, again, the writing of prescriptions, the moratorium on unfounded medical claims, those sorts of things will make the therapeutic experience for the patient better. They're going to get what they need, and it's going to work. They're going to feel better with less risk faster because they're going through that medical process, as opposed to going down to the store and having some 20-year-old tell them to buy a bunch of gummies and then just kind of winging it. And I've seen over the years many patients come to me from the recreational market, either long-standing cannabis users or more recent people who started in the rec market and realized that they weren't getting anywhere. And there are a myriad of issues from overuse and misuse and tolerance and dependence. But then there's also just that, if somebody's really sick, they have metastatic cancer, they don't have 6 to 12 months to screw around with this, just trying to figure out how to feel better. So that, and then there's the financial stuff, which is, if you go and buy a shotgun approach of products, you're going to walk out of there with $600 or $800 worth of stuff, much of which you didn't need, maybe all of it, and no idea which of it's going to actually work for you. Whereas, if somebody comes to me or somebody like me, I can point them pretty precisely to what is most likely to work anyway. And then through the process of follow-up, we can take a informed and thoughtful approach to modifying the initial regimen based on their experience and what products become available and that sort of thing.
Oh, okay. So you said most likely to work, and I'm going to play off of that. So let's pretend that all the NIH grants have been awarded that need to be awarded, all the science has been done, prohibition has ended,
I'm dead, by the
is
way.
rescheduled, like blah, blah, blah. So what are your thoughts, given the knowledge that you have today, about the medical benefits of the plan itself? And I'm asking this question kind of loaded because you published an article in October of last year called "The Dark Side of CBD." And so, one, I want to get your thoughts on the reality, and then I also just love your opinion on how the industry is responding to studies that demonstrate, positive promise or negative results. So first, your view, and then what you think everybody else is doing.
So, once all the research has been done, as you had sort of postulated, then I think that the answer to this will become very clear, right? It's really the question of how do we deal with things now where we don't have that research. And in many ways, we're in an unprecedented scenario in which the cart is firm before the horse, right? I mean, in most cases, we come up with a novel drug from wherever, it may be from nature or maybe purely synthetic, but you start with this and then you try to figure out in animals what it's good for. And then if it's working well in animals, then you move on to humans. And there's this sort of orderly forward progression that ultimately, if things work out well, leads to enough evidence to convince the FDA to allow it to go to market. And, right now we've got cannabis kind of everywhere. And then particularly on the West Coast of the US, we've got a whole bunch of derivative products, minor cannabinoids, CBN, CBG, CBC, it's kind of like a three-letter salad. And they're freely available for people to purchase and use. And we got basically bupkis on like, are these safe? What can they do for us? And a great example is I have a patient who's actually a very elderly physician, and she's got some of the most advanced multiple illnesses. It's kind of amazing that she's still breathing, and she'd be the first to say that. And her niece who lives in Texas tells her that she should be taking CBG. So she came to me and she said, well, what do you think of CBG? And I said, I think there's not enough information to tell you whether it's safe, let alone useful. I don't have great worries about the safety of CBG, but the other question is, where's the CBG coming from? And maybe the CBG is fine, but there's poison in the bottle along with it, right? And that gets to that article that you had mentioned that I wrote, which is really not so much about CBD itself, though my feelings about CBD are similarly that there's not enough human data. But this really was about, okay, now we've got hemp and that makes CBD, but then there are these guys out there who are taking the CBD and converting it into D8 or D10 or HHC or all of these kind of derivative intoxicating chemicals. And what do we know about the safety of those chemicals? Well, the answer is pretty much nothing. Plus, it turns out that the process of converting CBD into these other things generates all manner of other chemicals that either can contaminate the end product or are sort of invisible in the end product because they all have the same molecular weight, even though their structure is slightly different, and therefore they're not getting separated out. And this is exactly the sorts of industrial chemistry that the FDA oversees, making sure that the product goes to market and has only the things in it that are expected to be there. So, my feeling is that we need a whole lot more data and a whole lot more research and a whole lot more caution, I think, in the interim. And that seems problematic. I read this morning that there was a bill in Illinois to ban D8 and other hemp-derived intoxicating chemicals, and that it didn't make it to consideration, in particular because one representative, who interestingly enough is a Democrat, basically said, I'm not so sure we should be banning these things. And he wants to talk to his stakeholders. When you say stakeholders, of course, are industry, or maybe the people who voted for him, but it certainly was clear that he was not asking clinicians or scientists. And there is a certain lack of availing themselves of the input from the people who are most likely to know the accurate information, that makes me feel very uncomfortable, because again, this isn't being done with patients in mind. It's not being done with science and medicine in mind. It's really getting done sort of for this mixture of capitalist and populist reasons. And while in general that's pushing cannabis away from prohibition, which is a good thing, it's pushing it sort of over the cliff of, sure, whatever. And I don't think that's necessarily good for patients or for the general population.
So, Dr. Tischler, there's so much more I'd love to talk to you about, and I wanted the audience to have a chance to play Stump the Doctor, but we don't. So you have to come back, and everybody else, and we have to play Stump the Doctor. But before we end, I'd like to share with you that Dr. Tischler is the keynote for the upcoming Cannabis Science and Policy Forum on Friday, June 16th in Boston and on Zoom. Erica will post the forum details in the chat, and the forum is followed by the Boston Tea Pad with live jazz, good eats, plentiful libations, provocative conversation, and all of the stuff the Tea Pad is famous for, and a 20% discount for everybody that is here in person or online with the promo code CFCR. And thank you so much for such a wonderful and informative conversation. And everybody come on back to play Stump the Doctor.
And raise your glass.
And let's take a picture.
To Dr. Tischler. Thank you.
Thank you all. This was great fun. I feel like I must have talked too much if we didn't get to Q&A.
Yeah.
But people should feel free to email me anytime.
Great.
Get a screenshot?
Yeah, hold on. What's that again?
You want a screenshot of everyone. There will be a collage on something soon.
Yes.
Good. Thank you all.
All right.
Have a good day.